Good afternoon. I'm Tracy Sinclair here at Alaska's News Source, and we are getting ready to join a live press conference going on downtown to discuss how to decrease the number of pedestrian vehicle collisions in Anchorage. Let's join in.
Intend to lay on the table during tonight's regular assembly meeting. I've printed copies of the resolution, which are available over here on the table and happy to distribute. They're also linked on the press release calling for this conference. So to give an overview of who you'll hear from, first you'll hear from Assembly Vice Chair Meg Zalatel to provide opening remarks. She represents District 4, Midtown Anchorage, and sits on the AMAT's Policy Committee. Then you'll hear from Assembly Member Karen Bronga, who represents District 5, East Anchorage on the Anchorage Assembly, and we'll close with Assembly Member Daniel Voland, who represents District 1, North Anchorage, is co-chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee and also sits on the AMAT's Policy Committee. All three members will be available for questions afterwards. Meg.
Thanks, Sally. All right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us, especially on such short notice. As of today, local reporting has identified 12 people killed in pedestrian vehicle collisions throughout the municipality this year. That means in the municipality alone, we are on track to surpass the statewide record for pedestrian deaths, which was 13 in 2022. I am outraged at the lack of outrage in this community. This weekend, the Anchorage Daily News reported that since 2000, Anchorage police have killed 34 people. The recent spate of officer-involved shootings has rightfully garnered the attention of our entire community, including the administration and the police department, who are actively working as we speak to overhaul a system to make Anchorage safer for everyone. I have a parallel statistic. Since 2000, Anchorage drivers have killed more than 164 pedestrians. Because the traffic department has not yet published the 2023 annual report, that statistic does not include last year's data or even the 12 deaths reported this year. 165 verified deaths between 2000 and 2022 far exceeds the officer-involved shootings. Anchorage is now on track to become one of the deadliest cities in America. So we have to do something, and that should start today. The resolution we are laying on the table this evening asks the state of Alaska and the municipality to take immediate action, especially in corridors where pedestrian deaths have already occurred. We need three things. One, immediately install improved lighting. For example, on Tudor Road, west of Lake Otis, you'll find a dual-headed LED lighting installed a few years ago by DOT through the Highway Safety Improvement Program funding. Providing adequate lighting, especially in our shoulder seasons when the conditions are dark, is vital to safety in our winter city. Second, we can lower speed limits by at least 10 miles an hour and not to exceed 35 miles an hour. The single most impactful risk to pedestrians is speed. A pedestrian hit by a vehicle traveling at 40 miles per hour has an 85% chance of being killed compared to a 40% fatality rate when traveling at 30 miles per hour. Driving at slower speeds means you have more time to react, you have a wider field of vision, and the severity of the collision is greatly reduced. Third, we need to produce a public education campaign about the impact of speed on pedestrian safety. The Alaska Department of Transportation Commissioner Ryan Anderson himself said last fall, pedestrian crashes are 100% preventable. We need to drive these crashes to zero by working together. That means state and local agency, as well as drivers and pedestrians, all need to work together to change our sad reality. I just learned today that from the Central Region Director of DOT that a multi-agency task force is now convening with representation from the DOT and the municipality to coalesce behind action. This is a good first step. However, we need action. So at this point, I want to thank my colleagues for also joining me here today, and really would encourage you all to not just stop with today's action, but we ask for specific things by early October. So please don't simply let this drop because it's a today issue, it's an ongoing issue. With that, Member Bronga.
Thanks. I am so impressed with Member Zalatel. I was feeling the outrage, and I know Member Voland and probably everyone in this community but she goes to action, and I am so thankful for this resolution. A dozen deaths, a dozen families grieving loss of their loved ones, and a weight that we'll all carry in our neighborhoods and communities and on this body. East Anchorage is my home, and I happen to have what I consider some of the most dangerous roads in my area. Muldoon Road pushes somewhere in the neighborhood of 32,000 cars, and they go straight on through the Tudor Muldoon curve. In that corridor, we have school kids at Beggage, Creekside, Muldoon Elementary, and Scenic Park that are out on the streets trying to get to where they're going. And we have people who are with no cars. I'm in an area of town where people are more likely not to have a vehicle. We are a high density area, and some of the most highest multimodal shares in Anchorage. So I carry this weight, especially along with my fellow District 5 Assembly person, George Martinez. So whether you walk, drive, or ride, it's a responsibility for everyone to respect each other's safety on the road. And so I am asking us all to take a moment to support naming October as Pedestrian Safety Month. As an avid cyclist, I'd like to see the campaign shared between the municipality, state, that affirms our shared responsibility for driving down the number of preventable deaths on our roadways. More drivers should know about how speed drastically impacts safety, how quickly our road conditions change when seasons change. October is one of the darkest months of the year, so it's appropriate to shine the light on pedestrian safety and keep it top of mind. And I can add to, as the darkness increases, the wildlife on the roads, along with the children with clothing that often is not visible, with proper reflective equipment. And then I'd also like to encourage, besides the October Pedestrian Safety Month, a week without driving next week, correct? Okay. I'm encouraging, and I'm going to join in. I live in the very far corner of our bowl at Tudor Muldoon Curve, and I'm going to take a week without driving next week, and I encourage others to do the same. Step out of our vehicles, see the streets from a new perspective, see where the challenges are that you could report, that we can help to move safety to the forefront in our community. As a part of the national campaign happening next week, I'm committing to a week without driving. I often ride my bicycle to City Hall, but I have the privilege of owning 2 vehicles and a motorhome, which I am willing to set aside to come to City Hall on my bike and help be part of the awareness of what's happening on our roads. It's important to realize that not everyone has access to a car, and people, even in a winter city like Anchorage, rely on bicycles, public transportation to get around town every day. A week without driving is a commitment to seeing our city from anywhere other than the driver's seat. And with that, I'd like to welcome Member Voland to outline our next steps and take questions.
All right. Thanks, Karen. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Member Bronga actually does routinely ride her bike to City Hall pretty often, which is inspiring, coming all the way from East Anchorage. I echo everything that my colleagues have said. Number 1, excessive speed kills. What that means is whether it's 5th and 6th downtown, Muldoon in East Anchorage, Gamble and Ingra in Fairview, or Benson and Northern Lights in Midtown. We cannot continue to treat our urban centers as superhighways, prioritizing vehicle movement over safety. Number 2, everyone deserves to be safe on our streets. Drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, wheelchair users. It's a matter of equity. Number 3, we can do something today. The municipality and state should work together. It's time for action, not another drawn-out study. What we're doing today is asking our colleagues to take action by resolution. So we have a laid on the table resolution. What that means is the Assembly will vote whether to take that legislation up tonight. If the body votes in the affirmative, the resolution will be added to the agenda as a resolution for action. That means we could vote on it as early as tonight. Personally, I've heard from constituents and transportation professionals across sectors in agreement, Anchorage doesn't have to be this way. We can change our route. So with that, we are happy to take a few questions.
Kind of a jurisdictional question. So on those state roads, which the resolution identified as contributing to more than half of the fatalities that have occurred, does the Muni have the jurisdiction to change speed limits there, or does that have to go through the state?
So I think there are two routes there. One is the traffic engineer has the ability to set speed limits, but the Department of Transportation also has used something called safety corridors. You might be most familiar with the one as you go down Turnagain Arm, where they have temporarily lowered the speed limit. I've been advocating with them since 2022 to apply that in an urban context. So I think either way, I think there's a way to get to lower speed limits.
Okay, so it would be, I'm not sure I totally understand.
So either create an urban safety corridor and lower the speed limit, or have the traffic engineer lower the speed limit. I don't care how they get there, they just need to get there.
The Muni can't just go out and change the sign.
I think they can, if the traffic engineer says so, but I think DOT also has a route.
Any other questions? Sir.
Thanks. Matt Bucks with the Alaska Current.
Matt.
You talked a little bit about equity with like the road designs. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I know I live over in East Anchorage too, and there's large sections of road where either there's no sidewalk or the sidewalk is right up against a very busy road. You know, how does that factor in? Is that a more long-term discussion here? I know, you know, some places you have to go pretty far to find a sidewalk, for example, and I imagine that might be contributing to people being out on the road, but how does that factor in here?
So I think we could all give specific examples from our districts. I'll speak to Gamble and Ingra because that's something I've been focused on for a while now. We've been talking about fixing that highway system for 2 decades, right? And the fact that we have a 4-lane highway couplet driven through the middle of a neighborhood and all of the, I will say frankly, racist planning practices of the past that went into that, and that it's still not fixed. There's a glimmer of hope where we were able to receive a national grant, first of its kind, Reconnecting Communities pilot program. We were successful in getting awarded that grant, and the Assembly funded the local match to help have a constituent-driven planning process to reimagine that corridor. But it's an example of a conversation that has been happening for years and years and still hasn't been fully addressed. And that's in a lower income neighborhood where many folks, you know, as Member Bronga talked about the Muldoon area, for instance, many folks don't have access to a car. And I'll just say that someone who can't afford a car, their life matters just as much. Their ability to get to their essential destination matters just as much. So I think that's where that equity piece really it's driven home for me.
I just add that for years it's been the most dangerous intersection in town was 36th and New Seward. It was to be redesigned. We went through the design work. It was in the state transportation improvement program, and now it's not. And it's not funded anymore. So we identify something, we study it, and yet we don't follow through to construction. And that's concerning. It was used as a barrier for when the Assembly considered purchasing the Gold Lion. They were going to reconstruct that area. And so how real are we about our plans to change roads? And so if we're not real about moving forward where there was funding to reconstruct, go to design and reconstruct the most dangerous intersection, then what are we doing? I mean, I think that's the real question for me, and I think that it's really important to think about what that does when you move through so far in a process and you abandon a project. Right-of-way was taken. There are now empty lots sitting there. There there are still issues with the intersection. One of these fatalities happened in that area, and yet there's still no action. So who gets action? What does it take? And it's certainly not gonna happen where we already have disproportionately impacted communities. The national data shows who's disproportionately impacted in pedestrian crashes, and it's appalling. And I think the same is true here.
So is there like, I mean, why did this stuff fall off? You know, why did, you know, if you have this big redesign that makes it safer, why is it not a priority anymore or why is it not in the STIP or?
Lack of support from the governor.
Yeah, politics.
Okay.
To tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that we highlighted today was how that October is one of the darkest months, right? I think another thing that is very top of mind for us is we're moving into winter, right? We just had the special committee of the Transportation Committee, special meeting of the Transportation Committee, solely focused on winter maintenance and what we're gearing up for. And you mentioned, Matt, the sort of the lack of sidewalks or skinny sidewalks, right? Well, that problem is only exacerbated as they move into winter and the snow gets piled up on the sidewalk, forcing pedestrians into the road. And so not only is it a matter of design and those priorities, right? It's a matter of maintenance. And you know, I would just, again, call on the state, maintain your facilities. You mentioned the STIP. One of the things that we're seeing a push for in the STIP, and even in some of our local planning documents, the TIP, the MTP, you know, it seems like there's this desire of the state to do these highway expansion projects, to add lanes. Well, every extra lane is a lane that needs to be maintained. So if it were up to me, we would hit pause on adding any additional road lanes. And we would focus instead on the safety measures that we've called for, reducing speeds, enhanced lighting, decreasing lanes where it's appropriate, to take back some of that right-of-way and give it to non-motorized users. And then winter maintenance. Yeah. Wes?
I'm curious where public transportation fits into the Assembly's plans. You know, Member Braga seemed to be pushing pretty hard the act of maybe reducing car usage in the city and encouraging people. You know, I'm somebody who lived off Muldoon and used public transportation pretty regularly about 15 years ago. I've been told it's better now, but I don't necessarily get the same thing from people who regularly use it. You know, are there any plans to maybe better adjust or to change how we do public transportation to reduce these types of pedestrian fatalities?
Yes, so we've got some challenges right now, right, in terms of workforce with our public transportation, and that's something that the administration has been working on. You know, I think we're going to lose some frequency of service here in the near future. It's certainly something that the Assembly has wanted to fund in the past, and something that we have discussed through the AMAPS process. One of the things I believe on the TIP is an opportunity to do free bus fare for those who are 65 and older, 18 and younger, for instance, as a pilot project. So we are looking at ways, how can we expand service and how can we expand ridership? Did either one of you?
Similarly, just this last year, we were able to leverage in the municipal budget for this coming winter some positions for people mover that went with some federal funding for more snow removal equipment, really wanting to make sure access to the bus stops where pedestrians could wait safely to get their routes. So we made sure we leveraged the opportunity. It was a kind of unprecedented amount of money to move into people mover for purposes of snow removal, but they didn't have the right or enough workforce to make it happen. So we came alongside it, and my understanding is those positions have been hired for this winter.
I had heard that Muldoon corridor, the frequency of riders, buses coming through has been lowered because of the staff challenges. But I continue to be hopeful that we can get the transit center next to the west of Walmart. George Martinez and I are looking at a rec center transportation corridor right in there, transportation center. And I think it would really help that right around the Fred Meyer Baggage area, all the bus riders, they're pretty much encouraged to run across traffic to get their next bus. And if we were able to get a real transit center that was a place they could wait inside, it would be really an improvement to the Muldoon area.
One of the things that I think is pretty eloquently highlighted in the 2050 MTP, which is our long-range transportation plan, is the fact that until they get to the bus, everyone is a non-motorized user, right? Because you have to walk there or bike there. And particularly in a winter city, I think folks are going to be disincentivized to use public transportation if they can't get to the bus stop safely.
I also, I'm curious if, I understand that, this is kind of a quick reaction to what's been a pretty bad month for pedestrian fatalities, but have you noticed any trends in recent years that suggest that, the fixes that you're putting in place would do something? I only say that because, up until September, we were fairly average for the number of pedestrian fatalities. If you look at the traffic report, and then we had 6 in 1 month, it strikes me as I don't know if it's a freak month or if it's if it's sort of a trend, and I would also question, the focus on winter when it seems like most of these accidents aren't happening in winter months. They're kind of happening whenever. September's not a winter month, and it had the most in a single month since 2013, I think.
So the HSIP program, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, has specifically been targeting these kind of upticks. It's why the focus on lighting. So the lighting we're talking about actually illuminates behind the sidewalk and out into the street. And it was really first deployed around some of the pedestrian deaths that were happening on Tudor Road near Fulker Street. And so I think that piece there is something we were well aware of. It was something DOT in conversation at the AMATS Policy Committee and others were already trying to solve. And then I think in terms of speed, we see every one of these roads that we've had these deaths on are 45 miles an hour and faster, I believe. They are high-speed straight shots. So when you do that with a lack of visibility, it seems like we know it's a recipe for disaster. And we know that it's a low visibility time of year. We don't need pedestrian deaths to tell us that. We tell our kids that. It's part of the back to school campaigns. It's why we start getting, trying to put reflective gear on people, get your bike lights out, right? It's all of these things. So I don't think that it's necessarily a trend. I think what it is a set of consequences, dire consequences about a problem we already knew. So maybe it's a catalyst, but I don't feel like it's an outlier. When we go back, we've been having this conversation about this time of year, September and October, ever since I've been an assembly member for 5 years. So the question becomes, what's enough to spur the action?
Yeah, I think, Wes, if you look back at some of the resolutions that the Assembly has passed, even recently, you maybe will be able to sense frustration on the part of policymakers and this not being a new conversation. In your question, you said something about the average, right? Maybe this sort of recent spurt of pedestrian fatalities isn't representative of the average, and maybe not for Anchorage. But I will say Anchorage is not a stunning example. If you look at our recent traffic reports, our rates of our pedestrian and cyclist collisions, our 3 and 5 year moving averages are about double the national rates. So we have a long way to go. I think that this recent frequency of these pedestrian fatalities, as Meg said, has been sort of a catalyst, but it's the frustration sort of coming to a head on behalf of policymakers who have been trying to get this message out there. And I think it's disheartening. These are community members whose lives have been lost and their families affected. Yeah.
I wanted to add, when I was on the community council for Scenic Foothills, we had people coming about Apollo Drive, which is across from Scenic Foothills Elementary School, and there'd been a new pedestrian route pushed through to Apollo, and the kids were walking through there, and people were coming and saying the cars it's a downhill curving road, they're just whipping through here, can we do something? And it was, we just couldn't get any attention for it until a young man got hit. And then all of a sudden yeah, we'll do a traffic study, yeah, we'll look at it, and then we got our speed hump. And we should not have to have 12 deaths to shine a light on the problems with road safety, because it's all of our responsibility, and we just can't keep this kind of statistic going. It's horrifying.
A couple more questions?
Yeah, for anyone that might be questioning whether or not the ordinance 2023-65, some of those changes made within that could be contributing to some of the deaths seen within this last year, I mean, is there any sort of comment that you might have to that?
Yeah, so what I will say, I think what you're referencing is no longer penalizing jaywalking.
Yeah, the
Right.
jaywalking, safe pedestrian crossings, or changes like that.
So, as part of the rationale of that ordinance, we looked at trends of who often is the target of that type of enforcement, right, and equity issues there. But also, I think pedestrians, non-motorized users crossing where they're technically not supposed to, that to me is a symptom of an underlying etiology. The root cause being our streets are not designed to support non-motorized users. And I'll use a recent example that the Assembly has been very vocal about, a safety intervention on Minnesota, what we like to refer to as the Minnesota cheese grater. The safety intervention, let's put a wall up. This is a safety issue, this road, this high-moving, highway-like road, directly through what, if you look at our 2040 land use plan, that land use is designated as a town center, so it's supposed to be walkable, shoppable, mixed use, proximal to residential. But we're gonna say no, we're gonna emulate a highway. And because the state knows that this is a safety problem, this corridor, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put a wall up to discourage. We're gonna create hostile infrastructure to pedestrians. And that is the pattern that is being repeated over and over. In fact, right now, they wanna do the same thing as you're leaving downtown. Put a similar dividing wall up. That's the chosen intervention. Rather than asking the question, how can we support what many are calling active transportation? Pedestrians, cyclists, other modes of travel. How can we create more crosswalks, more signalized intersections, better lighting? Where should we slow speeds? That's the question we have to start asking as a community, is we need to be able to support in our designs, in our interventions, those folks who are not driving. So that's what I would say. in response to
Jaywalking
that
tickets
question.
wouldn't save the lives of these 12 people, right?
Right.
I mean, not at all.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a frankly ridiculous corollary, because, right, what we see is the roads are fatally flawed in their design. People cross where they're going to cross where it's convenient. So if you're going slower and we have better lighting, you have more time to react. Those are real interventions. Jaywalking tickets aren't.
A question that I don't have the answer to, but that I will be asking as a follow-up to this is, what have we done to traffic enforcement overall? Since the pandemic, how has that changed? Are we still doing the same level of speed limit enforcement, for instance? So, if we have the enforcement conversation around pedestrians, we should also be having the enforcement conversation around drivers.
To that end, have you guys talked with APD or talked with APDEA about enforcement or with the administration, TDAs?
I think to the extent that there's, no, not specifically, but we are well aware of the context of the lack of officers that we have for APD, so it's a bit of a reality. It's a hop to call. There's still a traffic enforcement unit, but in the end, I think that's one of the things we're asking for is take a look, where can enforcement paired with education and these other interventions. You can think of road safety as kind of like a triangle. It takes safe design, enforcement, and education. And any part of that missing triangle is an incomplete solution. So we fully expect, I believe they're part of the multi-agency task force that's been stood up. But in the end, you have to have an officer to be able to do that. And I think that capacity is a giant question.
Okay, one final question, if anyone has one. Representative Gray.
I'm Andrew Gray. I'm the Alaska State House Representative for the UMed District. I live in Campbell Park Community Council, which is in Midtown, which is, Meg Zolotel is our representative on the Assembly. And what we've wanted in Campbell Park for a long time is an overpass, a pedestrian overpass over Lake Otis. And we had a meeting with DOT a year ago where a representative from DOT said that we had no pedestrian deaths on Lake Otis, and therefore this was not a priority. And I think that unfortunately gives the impression that DOT views these pedestrian deaths as data points, and not, as Member Bronga pointed out, that these are lives, and that with people with families. And I will say that Campbell Park has a lot of very conservative members. Being able to cross Lake Otis safely is a nonpartisan issue, and there are conservative members of Campbell Park Community Council who remain outraged to this day that DOT stated that we could not get an overpass that we've been working on for over a decade. This is Dick Cheney's project from over a decade ago, that we can't get that until we have a pedestrian death. And I think it's unfortunate that that is the impression that DOT gave to our community council.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to share, so I had asked DOT to slow down speeds on L Street southbound, and this was before Sean Holland was the regional director, so certainly not Sean's fault, but DOT's response at the time was, no children have died yet trying to walk to Inlet View, so no, they're not gonna slow cars down on L Street.
So, can I ask a question? I walk and bike about 3,000 miles a year in Anchorage. I've lived in the downtown Fairview area for 37 years. And the reality is, there is a cushion that drivers take when they're driving. So if we lower the speed limits to 35 miles an hour, most are gonna drive 45. When I'm doing the speed limit, when I'm driving, people pass me like I'm sitting still, and I see APD radar officers, and they don't pull them over. So I think APD, as most drivers assume, they're getting that 10-mile-an-hour cushion. So is that part of the conversation, doing something about this 10-mile-an-hour cushion that drivers seem to take and APD seems to be fine with?
Yeah, Daryl, it is, and that's where we go back to the triangle, right? The enforcement and education have to go together. So once you start educating drivers about how speed is a determining factor in fatalities, you need to have the enforcement move with the reduced speed.
Good.
Without it, and then you also need to add other design interventions like road diets, right? It's much easier to enforce a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit on a 2-lane road versus a 4-lane road, or if it kind of narrows down. There's just that triangle is so important, and it's not new. These are things we've known for decades. One of the most interesting things I learned in preparing this resolution is that the federal government is now looking at the design of vehicles. What we know of the 12 fatalities, most of them were trucks or SUVs. These are larger, heavier vehicles. And so the speed reductions are even more important because some basic physics that I don't fully understand, right? But it's a lot more mass going, at a higher speed versus the design of cars that passed as well. So it's really interesting to see the federal government kind of really leading in this area, saying reduce the speeds, look at vehicle mass, look at the number of lanes, and educate drivers about this issue.
And I am putting forward amendment to our resolution to add the spoke of stepping up enforcement. Because I really feel like I cannot make a trip across town where you don't see a blatant red light runner and people speeding, like you say, going past you like you're standing still if you're going the speed limit. So I'm hoping that it will pass.
Well, I'll say our office hears from a lot of your constituents, especially Daniel's constituents who live near Chugach Optional. That's a neighborhood.
Mhm.
And the speed limit's 35 miles an hour, but most people do 45 or 50.
Yeah, on AMC, yep. Yeah, I want to acknowledge, we also have Representative Galvin and Mina, and if you want to.
Well, I just wanted to ask you, I'm not sure how the conversations have been going between community and state transportation, but I appreciate the question around, well, how's winter going to impact all of this? And I think that it is a really important discussion to have. If we can't handle how to move snow, we will have even fewer opportunities to cross the road, let alone sit and wait for buses and so forth. And so we will have more pedestrians in the road, no questions asked. Hopefully, drivers will be driving more slowly. To Megan's point, maybe the physics will not be as hurtful, but I think that in Midtown, where we do have such a cross-section of muni and state roads supposedly working together, I have this question for you because I did meet with the previous mayor, and he had all sorts of explanations for how they're doing a great job. I also met with transportation in listening to them in committees, and then the big question I had was, what's it gonna take? How much do you want so that you can get your job done? And unfortunately, we weren't given, we gave more, I would say, and thanks to Representative Fields, we gave more than they asked. And yet, we still find ourselves in this quandary, wondering if this is going to be enough. And so I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that interplay between state and muni.
Well, I think it's really challenging to have high-speed corridors crisscrossing our neighborhoods. Midtown in particular, it's A, C, Northern Lights, Benson, Tudor. I mean, and we're going to be taking a look at these through AMATs, through corridor studies, more studies. What do we do in the meantime to make our neighborhoods livable for those who aren't behind the wheel? And I think that's a real question. We are asking for specific interventions to be brought back to us by October 8th. We are saying, take as much time and attention as you have for officer-involved shootings, and I hate to make this corollary, but right, death is death, right? Give it the same time and attention. Get with your counterparts and figure out what those interventions can be. We've given you ideas and levers to pull. We are not the experts. Experts get in the room and figure something out. And if it comes with a monetary request, great, come talk to us. We're an appropriating body. Go back to the legislature if that's the case, but do something. The studies that are going to start in 2025 aren't going to help us today. They're going to put some ideas on the table, and then maybe there'll be construction projects a decade after that. So we're really focused on what can happen in the next 2 weeks, and we want tangible results, and we want tangible results with action items that can coincide with declaring October Pedestrian Safety Month, so we can get out there and educate folks, and we can work with our counterparts, right? This is a public health issue. As I said, I'm outraged by the lack of outrage. I feel like sometimes I'm walking around with the only indignation about this. I mean, to see the paper just, headline, drops off the front page, headline, drops off the front page. And I don't have a ton of emails in my email box, right? So we've got to elevate this, and frankly, only the administration and DOT are the ones who can drive this to action.
I think I'm kind of holding two thoughts in my head in response to your question. One is, when I think back to last winter, big snowfall, we all know that. But the fact that the municipality had to step up and help DOT maintain their facilities, at the time that felt kind of unfair. That being said, the recent special meeting of the Transportation Committee that I mentioned, I think I have two reasons for cautious optimism. One is that we're having the conversation early, ahead of winter. We're not scrambling after the fact to get information, and I think that speaks to the professionalism and lessons learned by the current administration. I'm also encouraged that we had DOT in the room, and we also had ASD in the room, and they are all collaborating and meeting. And one of the things that we heard is this hasn't happened before like this, where we're having early conversations, collaborative conversations, planning ahead. So I think we're all aware of the challenges that are upcoming in terms of workforce, aging fleet, etc. But as Member Zolotel said, we need the experts to get in the room and figure this out and let our legislators know how we can be best supported. Yeah.
I wanted to add one thing is when you think of coordinating between the state and the municipality, and I don't know how well they do this, but I did notice this summer a lot of the east-west routes were closed on the same stretches of time. For instance, part of DeBar was completely choked down to one lane, while Tudor also had construction going on, and somewhere on Northern Lights did. So all three of the east side cross-traffic areas were pretty much choked down to one lane or not passable. And so that gets the road rage going. And, so maybe there's a better way to coordinate, we're gonna work on this one in May and this one, probably can't work in May, but you know what I mean. Maybe you have to do it in September, I don't know, but we need to do a better job of keeping at least one route free and clear. And I know accidents throw that out the window in a heartbeat too, but it was a little frustrating this summer in my area of the world.
Well, could I just identify one action item that we should all be committed to? The Federal Highway Administration right now enables 100% federally funded complete streets projects. 100% federally funded. The State of Alaska Department of Transportation has to adopt a complete streets policy to deploy that money. So 2 weeks ago, before the most recent deaths, I checked in, and the commissioner's office said, we're reviewing the policy and we want to move it forward. So moving that policy forward, deploying that money ASAP is essential.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We've run out of time, which means it was a lively conversation, and appreciate you all being here. As Daniel mentioned, there are legislators in the room. The Ombuds Office staff are here. Municipal engineer Brad Coy is here as well. So we have the space until 2 o'clock if you have any outstanding questions that you'd like to ask directly to folks. The resolution is here printed out and available online. There are citations for some of the statistics that were shared during today's press conference if you'd like to look further into that. And as Daniel mentioned, the item is set to be laid on the table and ultimately up to the body to decide whether or not to take up tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And that was a press conference with 3 members of the Anchorage Assembly talking about their proposal to reduce the number of pedestrian vehicle collisions in the Anchorage area. What they are proposing is to install improved lighting that is used by the Highway Safety Inspection Program, and also to lower speed limits by about 10 miles per hour, not to exceed 35 miles per hour, and to produce a public education campaign about the impact of speed on pedestrians. They're also looking to name October Pedestrian Safety Month, and next week is a week without driving. And Assembly member Karen Bronga said that she is going to participate in that, and that she is going to ride her bike next week and not drive. So that is the latest information that we have from the Assembly on this issue. We did have a reporter in the room, Johnson Kuhn, so we'll have more tonight at 4, 5, 6, and 10 on Alaska's News Source, and you'll always find the latest on alaskasnewssource.com.